There is a punishment older than prison, older than execution, older than any written law or formal court or named authority. It required no weapon, no cage, no executioner. All it required was for everyone in the group to turn away. Banishment, the act of forcing a person out of the group entirely, is one of the oldest documented social behaviors in human prehistory. And for most of human existence, it was not a secondary punishment. It was not a last resort. It was, in practical terms, a death sentence delivered without blood. Most people assume ancient human groups were held together by strength, that the biggest, most dangerous individual dominated, and everyone else fell in line. The archaeological record does not support that. What it shows instead is something more precise, more deliberate, and more socially sophisticated than dominance hierarchies alone could explain. Ancient human groups ran on reputation, and reputation had consequences. The question is, what did you have to do to lose yours completely? Archaeologists studying burial sites from the Upper Paleolithic period, roughly 50,000 to 10,000 years ago, noticed a pattern that took decades to interpret correctly. Most individuals in group burial sites show evidence of care, healed injuries, deliberate placement, grave goods, the treatment of people who mattered to others. But scattered across excavation sites on multiple continents, researchers began identifying a different category of remains entirely: individuals buried alone, at distance from the group site, without grave goods, in some cases in positions that suggested the burial was hurried or perfunctory. Not the burial of someone mourned, the burial of someone the group needed to record as gone. The separation in death reflected a separation that had happened in life. Anthropologists studying contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, the Hadza in Tanzania, the Kungsan in the Kalahari, the Batek in Malaysia, have documented a consistent set of behaviors that triggered the social response ending in exile. These societies have no written law, no formal judiciary, no designated enforcement. But they have something that functions with the same precision: collective social memory and collective social will. The offenses that led to banishment were not random. They clustered around a specific category of harm, not violence itself. Violence between group members was common and usually managed through reconciliation rituals, compensation, or mediated resolution. What the group could not absorb, what it had no mechanism to repair, was a specific kind of violation. The violation of the fundamental contract that made group living possible at all: hoarding food during scarcity, repeated refusal to share resources when others were starving, sexual violence against group members, repeated theft from within the community, and perhaps most reliably documented across cultures, the behavior anthropologists call putting yourself above the group. The chronic attempt to dominate, to take more than your share, to position yourself above the leveling mechanisms that kept the group's internal balance intact. Researcher Christopher Boehm, in his analysis of egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies, documented what he called the reverse dominance hierarchy. In these groups, any individual who attempted to accumulate disproportionate power or resources was first mocked, then publicly criticized, then actively resisted. And if those mechanisms failed, if the behavior continued despite collective pressure, the group moved to the final option. They left. Or they made the person leave. The distinction mattered less than the outcome. The process was not a trial. There was no single moment of formal judgment. It was a gradual withdrawal of the things that made group membership real. Fewer invitations to sit by the fire. Meat distributed to others first, with nothing left over. Eye contact withheld. Names not spoken. The social fabric that had sustained a person simply pulled away, thread by thread, until there was nothing left to hold on to. And then one day, the group moved camp, and did not tell that person where they were going. For a lone individual in the Pleistocene landscape, separation from the group meant the immediate loss of everything that made survival possible. No shared knowledge of water sources, no coordinated hunting, no protection against predators at night, no one to help during illness or injury, no one to help raise children. The statistical reality of survival alone in that environment was brutal and short. Banishment was not symbolic. It was termination delivered through social mechanics rather than physical ones. What makes this behavior remarkable, from an evolutionary standpoint, is how precisely calibrated it was. The same societies that would carry an injured elder for miles rather than leave them behind, the same groups that fed the disabled and healed the broken, would collectively and deliberately withdraw all of that care from a specific individual under specific conditions. The line between the person who was carried and the person who was abandoned was not drawn by strength or usefulness. It was drawn by trustworthiness, by whether your presence in the group made the group more viable or less. A person who could no longer hunt, but who had spent decades contributing, sharing, supporting, that person was worth the cost of carrying. The calculus was not about current output. It was about the entire accumulated record of the relationship. A person who could hunt, who was physically capable, who contributed materially, but who repeatedly violated the social contract, who took without giving, who undermined the trust structures that held everyone else together. That person was a net liability regardless of their physical contribution, and the group's survival depended on removing liabilities. The skeleton record supports this. Individuals with healed injuries showing sustained long-term care were found within group burial sites. Individuals who showed signs of violent conflict with multiple group members, fracture patterns consistent with being struck by several people simultaneously, were sometimes found at the periphery. The archaeological language of belonging in exile written in bone. What the anthropological record from living hunter-gatherer societies adds to this picture is the emotional texture. Banishment in these communities was not a clean administrative act. It was experienced as profound grief by the banished person, and sometimes by members of the group who had personal relationships with them. The decision was not made easily. It was made when the group collectively concluded there was no alternative left.